Morena Tawa School whānau. It's Friday and it's another beautiful day here in the city of Wellington and especially in our suburb of Tawa. Hey, great to see you all. Today I've got one more Little Yellow Digger story to read, and then we are going to continue on with George's Marvellous Medicine. I think I'm just going to move my camera a bit to get out of the sun. There we go. That's a little bit better. I'm glad my office is nice and clean. So firstly, the Little Yellow Digger and the bones today. It started to rain on the Monday. It rained on the Tuesday as well. It bucketed down on the Wednesday and the rivers were starting to swell. There was thunder and lightning on Thursday and bridges and roads swept away. Well, the light's not very good there. Let me just move around a little bit more. It's a little bit better. There we go. By Friday, the hillsides had crumbled and traffic was held up all day. There were bushes and boulders had tumbled and diggers were needed to clear them away. There were diggers of all shapes and sizes, a backhoe with a big grapple teeth, a loader with huge scraper buckets, and tough crawler tires underneath. A little yellow digger came last to help where a cave had appeared. The digger was small, so couldn't reach it. With caution, a way could be cleared. Whatever might be inside it, it might be like stories of old, where fierce fire-breathing dragons guarded treasures of rubies and gold. The digger was clearing the rubble, boulders, and thick, sticky mud when all of a sudden the driver felt a shudder and heard a great thud. He climbed from the cab very quickly. He wondered if they'd struck a stone, but found that it had was a very large rock, and from it was poking a bone. I wonder what they have found. The bone was simply enormous, too big for a horse or a cow. It must have been there for many ages, locked in the rock until now. Inside the cave there were fragments of what looked like very large teeth, and more rocks and bones showing in them as he carefully dug underneath. He rang the museum to help them. They answered the call straight away. 2 people came out to take photos and measure the bones where they lay. What animal had the bones been from? How long had they been there? They needed more experts to tell them, so they lifted the rocks with great care. The digger had now cleared a pathway so their van could get out with its load. The rocks had been packed very gently. They must not be harmed on the road. Their colors were no longer shiny. The backhoe with big grapple teeth was dirty, and so was the loader, its crawler tires muddy beneath. The little yellow digger went last, as its driver had stayed to make sure that the cave had been boarded up safely, its rocks and its bones all secure. It was not until many months later, after the flood and the rain, a notice appeared in the paper recalling the story again. The very same day came a letter. The driver undid it with care. Inside was a grand invitation to a party to meet with the mayor. The headline saying, "Exciting find by Little Yellow Digger." The party was at the museum. It must be a special event. People were very excited. The television had even been sent. It was a dinosaur. There were bones and there were teeth, and there was the head, and written beneath, and it says, "This is a theropod, a dinosaur that was a carnivore. It's liked its meat, and that's why it had so many teeth." Then everyone thanked the digger for the work it had done in the flood, and praises were heaped on its driver for finding the bones in the mud. It'd be a pretty exciting find if you came across some dinosaur bones. All right, we're up to the next chapter of George's Marvellous Medicine. George begins to make the medicine. Remember from yesterday, George has a grandma who's, I don't think she's very nice exactly. She reminds me of actually reminds me of Mrs. Twit a little bit nasty. Well, we're going to find out what's going to happen next. George took an enormous saucepan out of the cupboard and placed it on the kitchen table. "George," came the shrill voice from the next room. "What are you doing?" "Nothing, Grandma," he called out. "You didn't think I can hear you just because you closed the door. You're rattling the saucepans." "I'm just tidying the kitchen, Grandma." Then there was silence. George had absolutely no doubts whatsoever about how he was going to make his famous medicine. He wasn't going to fool about wondering whether to put in a little bit of this or a little bit of that. Quite simply, he was going to put in everything he could find. There would be no messing about, no hesitating, no wondering whether a particular thing would knock the old girl sideways or not. The rule would be this: whatever it was, if it was runny or powdery or gooey, in it went. Nobody had ever made a medicine like that before. If it didn't actually cure Grandma, then it would anyway cause some exciting results. It would be worth watching. George decided to work his way around the various rooms one at a time and see what they had to offer. He would go first to the bathroom. There were always lots of funny things in the bathroom. So upstairs he went, carrying the enormous two-handled saucepan before him. In the bathroom, he gazed longingly at the famous and dreaded medicine cupboard, but he didn't go near it. It's the only thing in the entire house he was forbidden to touch. He had made solemn promises to his parents about this, and he wasn't going to break them. There were things in there that they had told him that could actually kill a person, and although he was out to give Grandma a pretty fiery mouthful, he didn't want a dead body on his hands. George put the saucepan on the floor and went to work. Number one was a bottle labeled Golden Gloss Hair Shampoo. He emptied it into the pan. "That ought to wash her tummy nice and clean," he said. There's George there doing his stuff. He took a full tube of toothpaste and squeezed out a whole lot of it in one long worm. "Maybe that'll brighten up those horrid brown teeth of hers," he said. There was an aerosol can of super foam shaving soap belonging to his father. George loved playing with aerosols. He pressed the button and kept his finger on until there was nothing left. A wonderful mountain of white foam built up in the giant saucepan. With his fingers, he scooped out the contents of a jar of vitamin-enriched face cream. In went a small bottle of scarlet nail varnish. "If the toothpaste doesn't clean her teeth," George said, "then this will paint them as red as roses." He found another jar of creamy stuff labeled hair remover. "Smear it on your legs," it said, "and allow to remain for 5 minutes. George tipped it all into the saucepan. There was a bottle with yellow stuff inside it called Dishworth's famous dandruff cure, and it went. There was something called Brilladent for cleaning false teeth. It was a white powder, and that went too. He found another aerosol can, Nevermore Ponking Deodorant Spray, guaranteed, it said, to keep any unpleasant body smells away for a whole day. She could use plenty of that, George said as he sprayed the entire canful into the saucepan. Liquid paraffin, the next one was called. It was a big bottle. He hadn't the faintest idea what it did to you, but he poured it in anyway. That, he thought, looking around him, was about all from the bathroom. On his mother's dressing table in the bedroom, George found another lovely aerosol can. It was called Helga's Hair Set. Hold 12 inches away from the hair and spray lightly. He squirted the whole lot into the saucepan. He did enjoy squirting these aerosols. Then there was a bottle of perfume called Flowers of Turnips. It smelt like old cheese. In it went. And into went a large brown box of powder. It was called Pink Plaster. There was a powder puff on top, and he threw that in as well for luck. He found a couple of lipsticks. He pulled the greasy red things out of the little cases and added them to the mixture. The bedroom had nothing more to offer, so George carried the enormous saucepan downstairs and trotted into the laundry room, where the shelves were full of all kinds of household items. The first one he took down was a large box of super white for automatic washing machines. Dirt, it said, will disappear like magic. George didn't know whether Grandma was automatic or not, but she was certainly a dirty old woman. So she better have it all, he said, tipping the whole box full. Then there was a big tin of Waxwell floor polish. Removes filth and foul messes from your floor and leaves everything bright and shiny, it said. George scooped the orange-coloured waxy stuff out of the tin and plonked it into the pan. There was a round cardboard carton labelled flea powder for dogs. Keep well away from dog food, it said, because this powder, if eaten, will make the dog explode. Good, said George, pouring it all into the saucepan. He found a box of canary seed on the shelf. Perhaps it'll make the old bird sing, he said, and in it went. Next, George explored the box with shoe cleaning materials, brushes and tins and dusters. Well now, he thought, Grandma's medicine is brown, so my medicine must be brown or she'll smell a rat. The way to colour it, she decided, would be with brown shoe polish. The large tin he chose was labelled dark tan. Splendid. He scooped it out with an old spoon and plonked it into the pan. He would stir it up later. On his way back to the kitchen, George saw a bottle of gin standing on the sideboard. Grandma was very fond of gin. She was allowed to have a small nip of it every evening. Now he would give her a treat. He would pour in the whole bottle. He did. Back in the kitchen, George put the huge saucepan on the table and went over to the cupboard that served as the larder. The shelves were bulging with bottles and jars of every sort. He chose the following and emptied them one by one into the saucepan. A tin of curry powder, a tin of mustard powder, a bottle of extra hot chili sauce, a tin of black peppercorns, and a bottle of horseradish sauce. There, he said aloud, that should do it. George, came the screechy voice from the next room. Who are you talking to in there? What are you up to? Nothing, Grandma, absolutely nothing, he called back. Is it time for my medicine yet? No, Grandma, not for about half an hour. Well, just so you don't forget it. I won't. Grandma, George answered, I promise I won't. The next chapter, animal pills. At this point, George suddenly had an extra good wheeze. Although the medicine cupboard in the house was forbidden ground, what about the medicines his father kept on the shelf in the shed next to the hen house? The animal medications. What about those? Nobody ever said he mustn't touch those. Let's face it, George said to himself. Hairspray and shaving cream and shoe polish are all very well, and they will have no doubt caused some splendid explosions inside the old geezer. But what about the magic mixture now? Because it needs a touch of real stuff, real pills, real tonics to give it a punch and muscle. George picked up the heavy 3/4 full saucepan and carried it out of the back door. He crossed the farmyard and headed straight for the shed alongside the hen house. He knew his father wouldn't be there. He was out haymaking in one of the meadows. George entered the dusty old shed and put the saucepan on the bench. Then he looked up at the medicine shelf. There were 5 big bottles there. 2 were full of pills, 2 were full of running stuff, and 1 was full of powder. I'll use them all, George said. Grandma needs them. Boy, does she need them. The first bottle he took out contained an orange-coloured powder. The label said, for chickens with foul pest, hen gripe, sore beaks, gabby legs, cockroolitis, egg trouble, broodiness, or loss of feathers, mix 1 spoonful only with each bucket of feed. Well, George said aloud to himself, and he took the whole bottle full. The old bird won't be losing any feathers after she had a dose of this. The next bottle he took down from had about 500 gigantic purple pills. For horses with horse throats, it said on the label, the horse throat horse should suck 1 pill twice a day. Grandma may not have a horse throat, but she certainly has got a sharp tongue. Maybe they'll cure that instead. And into the saucepan went the 500 gigantic purple pills. Then there was a box full of thick yellowish liquid for cows, bulls, and bullocks, she said. Will cure cowpox, cowmange, cropped horns, bad breath in bulls, earache, toothache, headache, hoofaache, tailach, and sore udders. The grumpy old cow in the living room has every one of those rotten illnesses, George said. She'll need it all. With a slop and a gurgle, the yellow liquid splashed into the now nearly full saucepan. The next bottle contained a brilliant red liquid. Sheep dip, it said, for sheep rot and for getting rid of ticks and fleas, mix 1 spoonful in 1 gallon of water and slosh it down the sheep. Caution, do not make the mixture any stronger or the wool will fall out and the animal will be naked. By gum, said George, how I'd love to walk in and slosh it all over Grandma and watch the teas and flicks go jumping off her, but I can't, I mustn't, so she'll have to drink it instead. He poured the bright red medicine into the saucepan. The last bottle on the shelf was full of pale green pills, pig pills, the label announced. For pigs with pork prickles, tender trotters, bristle blight, and swine sickness, give 1 pill per day. In severe cases, 2 pills may be given, but more than that will make the pig rock and roll. Just the stuff, said George. For that miserable old pig there in the house, she'll need a very big dose. She tipped all the green pills, hundreds and hundreds of them, into the saucepan. There was an old stick lying on the bench that had been used for stirring paint. George picked it up and started to stir his marvellous concoction. The mixture was as thick as cream, and as he stirred and stirred, many wonderful colours rose up from the depths and blended together. Pinks, blues, greens, yellows, browns. George went on stirring until it was all well mixed, and even so there were still hundreds of pills lying on the bottom that hadn't melted. And there was his mother's splendid powder puff floating on the surface. I shall have to boil it all up, George said. One good quick boil on the stove is all it needs. And with that, he staggered back towards the house with the enormous heavy saucepan. On the way, he passed the garage, so he went in and see if there was anything else that was interesting he could add. He added the following: half a pint of engine oil to keep Grandma's engine going smoothly, some antifreeze to keep her radiator from freezing up in winter, a handful of grease to grease her creaking joints, then back to the kitchen. The next chapter is called The Cook-Up. Now, as I said yesterday, there is a disclaimer at the start of the story. It says, warning to readers, do not try to make medicines yourself. Do not do this at home. Just remember that this is a story. Well, that's all for today. We're going to be back on Monday for another Tawa School story time. Have a great weekend. And hopefully, by the end of Monday, we will have found out if we are going to level 2, which will mean that we'll all be able to come back to school, which will be really awesome. But we'll be letting your parents know more about that over the next week or so. Hey, look after yourselves, and we'll see you next week. Ka kite anō.